What's going on, everybody? It's RoarYJ coming at you with a brand new video, and over the last weekend, as of recording this video, we just had the 250th Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series, with 3 different YCS events taking place all across the globe, allowing players from all over to participate in such a momentous occasion. With multiple events going on, this led to thousands of different duelists with different decks taking place in the event, and with so many different builds, we get to take a peek at what may have over or underperformed at such an event. There are plenty of sources out there that can tell you what the best decks are projected to be, but I'm deciding to take a little bit of a different approach, with that being the best hand traps. Should you be looking for the best board breakers after this event, I should also in a few days have a video going up with a board breaker tier list, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into my hand trap tier list for the April 2023 format post 250th YCS. So as always, starting us off, we have Ash Blossom, and Ash, again, as I always mention, poster child of hand traps, literally the first thing that you think of when you think of hand traps, and for good reason, especially right now, because Ash is just such a strong hand trap. If you look at different deck lists throughout the event, especially in the top 64 cuts, you can just see so many players using Ash Blossom, be it in the main or even the side deck, because of how powerful it is against a lot of the top decks right now. Sure, the Kshatri-La player gets to take a peek out of your extra deck and rip something from there if you Ash the Theosis, but you're still stopping them from playing the rest of their turn unless they have an extender, and it's probably no wonder why Branded didn't see nearly as much top cut success as people expected it to see, because of how many people were on Ash Blossom. It can also just outright end a Labyrinth player's whole career, and it can even interrupt decks like Sprite on their starter or Gigantic, and for all of these reasons, I think Ash is probably almost a mandatory hand trap should your deck have the room for it. Next on our list is Ghost Belle, and Ghost Belle is a hand trap that I also saw a little bit more than I expected to see when I was perusing deck lists, and honestly, I can kind of see why in a sense. So, Belle is a hand trap that is usually a little bit situational. It depends on the format, really. And right now, I wouldn't even argue that it's one of the best hand traps you can play. However, depending on your deck and what matchups you expect to see, or for example, what matchups are like the weakest for your deck, Ghost Belle can end up being a very solid hand trap. Namely, she's pretty good against the branded matchup should they not have access to Lost at any point, and it's also good against a lot of the more rogue options, but we've also in this event seen a massive influx in the Runic engine. This is something I want to talk a bit more about as we go through each of the hand traps on this list, but the Runic engine is definitely something that kind of took the entire event by storm, and Ghost Belle is shockingly enough a really solid hand trap against that deck as well, due to being able to stop Runic Fountain due to it putting things on the bottom of the deck. To be fair, unless you're playing a deck like Mathmech or another one that can just fit like a million hand traps in your main deck, I probably wouldn't take Belle out of the side deck personally, but I don't know, I feel like she's still a pretty solid hand trap overall and not a bad option at all this format. Next on our list is Bystials, and yeah, no, Bystials are still in a really bad spot. The only list I saw playing Bystials that wasn't branded in the main deck was like, I saw a Sword Soul player citing some because it's a level 6, and that's basically the extent of its usefulness. Next up we have Chaos Hunter, and this is a card that I kind of overhyped a little bit on my last tier list, and looking back on it, it's really not that great of a card. So, admittedly, it's pretty cool in a deck like Sprite for a Mannequin Cat target if you're not locked currently, but other than that, I mean, like, so you have to discard in order to summon her, so you're already basically losing 2 cards out of your hand just to get a pseudo Lancia effect. But on top of that, it makes Thrust an even more powerful card, and against Kshatri-La, the biggest threat it's used against, they could just steal it with Big Eye, and now they have another level 7 on board, so I mean, what are you gonna do? Next on our list is Contact C, and Contact C I had at the very top of Solid in the last one, but I think I'm gonna bump it down to the lower end of Solid in this one, because I didn't see, from the list that I looked at, I didn't see a single Contact C, and I think it's mainly because people are expecting other people to be prepared for Contact C, and so it's kind of a situation like Nibiru usually, where a lot of people are playing Nib, people then prepare for Nib, people then take out Nib, and then people aren't preparing for Nib after that, and so you just put Nib back in. I feel like there's going to see like some kind of fluctuating levels of play throughout the format. However, I feel like a lot of people are more prepared for it. You know, Kshatri-La can play things like Donner in order to out it, of course, unless they use their Kshatri-La Theosis, obviously. You know, Branded can use Sprint in order to out it. Sprite gets a material for their Sprint. It's so funny how they both use a card called Sprint. But the TLDR is that a lot of decks actually have in archetype or even like slightly other counter cards in order to counter the Contact C. So until people stop playing cards that just happen to out the Contact C, or the deck slow down in order to not be able to out it in the first place, then I feel like it's going to fluctuate more often than not, even if it is still a pretty solid hand trap overall, in my opinion. That can't be said, though, for DD Crow, which is going to go probably below the Bystials, because the Bystials can at least serve as free bodies, and they're good in decks like Branded, whereas DD Crow, I mean, the best bet to play this card in is Bird Up, y'all, and as the Bird Up guy, you probably know that I don't think Bird Up is very great right now. Like, DD Crow is the definition of situational, but it's literally so situational right now that I'd just put it in not recommended. Something that will go into situational, though, is Dimension Shifter. So Dimension Shifter, I see it in a few lists here and there, but it's usually just used as a counter card now for the decks that used to be main decking it, because certain matchups, you know, for example, I'm pretty sure Rika, like right now, which actually saw a lot of success at the YCS that a lot of people didn't expect, they kind of need their graveyard in order to access a lot of their plays, or at least a lot of their really good plays, you know, with the Sun Avalon cards and stuff like that. And so as a Kshatri-La player, Flu player, etc., you can just side this card right in, and you can deal with that matchup quite easily. However, it's still nowhere near the amount of power that it was during tier limit format, and until we get another format in which the graveyard is just that important, and it's more of a tier 0 format like it was during tier limit format, I don't think Dimension Shifter is going to be moving very high out of situational anytime soon. God, we're not even halfway through, and I'm just sitting here realizing how scuffed this tier list is compared to my usual ones. I'm sorry, y'all. Next up on our list is Droll and Lockbird, and Droll is a card that I think has only gotten significantly stronger as the format has gone on. So it was played here and there as kind of a niche out to Castra because, you know, of course they could only search with like their Unicorn, then you hit them with a Droll and now they can't use Fender or anything like that. It's especially better if you hit them on the field spell, but it was kind of not seeing too much play. But now a lot of side decks are featuring Droll because it's just such a powerful card in a format where there's so many tier 2 or lower decks. Like, Droll has always been known as like the rogue killer because so many decks just can't function after getting hit by a Droll, because their niche rogue strategy requires a lot of searching or drawing. But it's especially good right now against Runic, which we mentioned earlier has been seeing a massive amount of success, because you can hit something like, of course, their Hugin or whatever their engine stuff is, or better yet, you can hit the Runic stuff before they even access their engine, and this will obviously stop their Fountain plays, one of the strongest cards in the entire archetype. Thankfully, we're not in a format that's bad enough to have Droll in the main deck, but I highly feel like if you want basically a free win against a lot of tier 2 or lower decks, or you don't favor your matchups that way, you can just throw Droll into your side deck at 2 or 3 and just watch the fireworks go off. So next up on our list is Gamma, and I find Gamma very interesting because we've been seeing a lot more Gamma lately. Not as much as something like Droll, but it's been popping up here and there a lot more than it was before, and I think it's for some pretty good reason. So for example, I believe it is, let me read this out, Minjae Kim's list. I probably butchered that, I'm so sorry. But he played Gamma in his Labyrinth deck in order to secure cards like Welcome going off from things like Ash Blossom, which, as you can see, is basically the best hand trap in the entire game right now. And I think that's really, really cool, especially in combination with Psyframe Lord Omega, which gives you a free hand rip. Like, why would you not get a free Ash Negate and a hand rip on top of the stuff you're already doing, which can then future-proof you against even more hand traps or just rip really important starter cards out of the opponent's hand. We also see in Polly Aronson's list, who got first place at YCS Los Angeles with his Castra deck, he also played Gamma in the side, and I'm not too certain exactly what the purpose was for it, at least, unless it was just there as a free disruption. I mean, like, Gamma being able to negate and destroy is very powerful, but even with just those 2 lists that I mentioned, there's probably at least a good few more throughout the events that actually played Gamma, even in their side deck. So I do want to put it above Shifter in situational because, again, not a lot of decks can make good use out of Gamma, but I do like seeing Gamma see a lot more play now, especially considering it was seeing basically 0 plays for like the last couple of formats. Next on our list is Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood, and as I mentioned, literally in like every single one of my tier lists, it's going to go in the solid category. For as long as the time rules are a thing, this is a great card to feature in your side deck that almost always makes its price go back up as soon as a competitive player in a feature match utilizes it. Like, come on, y'all, please just pick up your first ed Ghost Sisters. Next up on our list is No Material. No Material sweep, baby. I will not stop rooting for this card, except for the fact that it's still going in the situational category. I mean, okay, it's better than it used to be because locking your opponent out of using something as material is pretty cool, but unfortunately that's all it does, And I mean, like, it can be a funny small world bridge maybe if you're playing small world in something and you need like a level 1 fairy. It's a level 1 light fairy, right? If you want a bridge for that, like, be my guest, but no material, unfortunately, isn't going to be going anywhere from the situational category for now. Next on our list is Orange Light, and Orange Light, as always, since the Ishizu cards got supremely nerfed, it's probably gonna go below the Bystials, above DD Crow, because granted, nothing really wants to play DD Crow except for Bird Up right now, but at least Orange Light can see play in, like, certain Vernisylph lists and, like, Drytron and stuff like that if you want to play it in Drytron, so it's seeing a little bit more play, but nowhere near enough to move it out of this category. Next on our list, we have Imperm, and similarly to Ash, Imperm, while not in every single list, was in a lot of lists, be it the main or the side. And that's because Imperm is, well, it's Imperm. I mean, like, negating the effects of a monster until the end of the turn, and potentially locking off an entire column for spells and traps as well. Very strong, and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. So, personally, I don't see it moving anywhere anytime soon. Next is Kelbeck, and Kelbeck also joining at the, probably not the bottom, because, to be fair, we've been seeing a lot of Naturia lately. Naturia Runic did very well at all the events, getting 2nd place at Los Angeles. And though it's not the worst hand trap, it is at 1, so I'll put it in the middle. I don't know. Alright, so I'll be the first to admit that I was way too harsh on Lancia in my last tier list. Looking back on it, I went to the tier list and I was like, wow, I really put it in not recommended, huh? Speaking of which, this should be don't recommend. But I genuinely underplayed the value that Lancia has on this current format, so I will put it above probably Ghost Sister, obviously, because, you know, this saw at least a little bit more play. But in the solid category, I think Lancia is decent against Castra. Admittedly, they do still end on at least Unicorn Fenrir bare minimum, but they aren't accessing any, like, banishes from your extra deck. They can't use things like Prosperity, and probably most importantly to a lot of people's eyes is that it's not like Chaos Hunter where it makes Thrust a very potent card, because having a monster on board and letting them add instead of setting is really scary compared to just discarding the Lancia from your hand. Not to mention, I'm pretty sure a lot of decks can just search the Lancia. I mean, like, I know Drytron can obviously search it because it's a light fairy, but even Mathmech, I'm pretty sure can small world bridge into it due to it being a light monster. So you can kind of just access this card very significantly easier compared to something like Chaos Hunter, all without having to have that additional discard. So Lancia, I apologize for how I treated you in the last one. Please forgive me. Next up is Ghost Mortar, and Ghost Mortar, basically as always, going into this solid category. I mean, it's a free Imperm, guys, that also does burn, so it can help in time. The main issue is that I believe it's using it on your turn that ends up being annoying because it is a trigger effect and not a use whenever effect like Imperm, Baylor, etc. But it's still an incredibly strong card, and usually a really popular choice when people need to play an extra hand trap. Okay, actually, that might be a bit excessive. I'll put it like above Contact C because it's not seeing that much play. Next up on our list, we have Nibiru, and as always, like I mentioned earlier, Nibiru goes into a format, people prepare for it, people stop playing Nib, people stop preparing for Nibiru, and then Nibiru comes back into the format. So I'm going to put it in the high impact category. So Nibiru is a really strong hand trap at gatekeeping a lot of decks. It's similar to Droll in the sense that a lot of tier 2 or lower decks just don't have an out to Nibiru, but it's also really good against basically every tier 1 deck right now, and it serves not just as a really powerful disruption, but it's also a really good fallback plan because you can go first, make your entire board with a Nib still in hand. Your opponent can, like, break your board with something like, I don't know, Dark Ruler or any of the board breakers we'll go over in our board breaker tier list coming up in just a few days. But you can then just nib them and still have the potential to win that game if your deck has enough follow-up. I think it's an incredibly strong blowout card that admittedly can be countered by things like Castra going for a Rise Heart Pass, but I mean, I still don't think that's enough to warrant Nib not being played, especially considering it saw almost as much play as Ash this event. Next up is Ogre, and man, I love Ogre so much, but it is going to go into the situational category. Admittedly, it hits more things than Shifter right now, but it did see, like, I think a play in, God, what deck was it? I don't know. Some top deck from, like, a top 64 from one of the events was playing Ogre in the main, which I thought was really interesting. But Ogre just isn't really that worth it right now. Most of the time, it's not really doing much except for a 1-for-1 trade, which, I mean, granted, so does things like Ash Blossom, but Ash can hit a variety of more things than Ogre that are much more important. Next up is Phantasme, and I hate this card. I really don't like Phantasme. I feel like it's not a very good card, especially right now. After that, we have Token Collector, and considering the abysmal representation of Sword Soul, and God, I don't even think I saw any Adventurer decks, I'm going to be putting Token Collector way down here. Admittedly, again, it does hit Sword Soul at least, so I'll put it above DD Crow, maybe. Actually, no, DD Crow is actually better because, like, at least Bird Up can play this, but Token Collector, it does hit Sword Soul, does hit Adventurer, but at that point, why not just play something else, you know? Effect Veiler, of course, as always, is Effect Veiler. I'm going to put it below Bell, above Lancia. It's mainly seeing a lot of play in decks like Math Mech that already play a bunch of different hand traps, especially that can draw into them, but it's always just a really good card to have, similar to Ghost Mortar, in case you need an extra hand trap slot, even if it can only be used during the opponent's turn. Alright y'all, as much as I love Ghost Reaper, she's also going in the don't recommend category, and wow, I just realized just how big the don't recommend category is in this list. But let's put Ghost Reaper... Admittedly, it can actually be a really strong blowout, but the problem is that there's way too many decks right now in order to reliably try to counter with Ghost Reaper. So yeah, you can hit things like, you know, Sprite, Castura, stuff like that branded with Ghost Reaper, but A, those decks usually don't care about what you're hitting out of their extra deck, and B, I mean, there's just way too many deck stuff going on right now. Actually, I'm probably going to bump it below these because it's not really as impactful as a lot of people might expect it to be if they're trying to play it. And then finally, we have, I believe this is Retaliating Sea. Y'all, if Shifter was already bad, this card's going to be exponentially worse because it's just Shifter, but only good in B-Trooper. Well, everybody, that is going to do it for my hand trap tier list post 250th YCS. Again, I know it was a bit more scuffed than my usual tier lists are. I've been having a lot of technical difficulties throughout this recording, so I hope you can forgive me, but I think this is still a pretty accurate tier list overall. I like to see the way that hand traps end up moving in and out of different formats, especially in a format as varied as this, where you kind of have to have a one-size-fits-all hand trap in most of your situations, because otherwise they're just not going to hit as many things due to the amount of variance in the format. There are probably a few things on here that you can probably swap out. I mean, Ghost Mortar can probably go down here because situational and that your deck usually only plays this if you can play a lot of hand traps, and then, you know, Contact Sea as well because a lot of people can counter it, but I feel like overall, other than that, this can probably be taken at least seriously involving the high impact and the upper solids, and especially the don't recommends, of course. But that's just my opinion. Let me know yours down in the comments below because that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like. I also put this video and the channel into to recommended. And if you like this content and you want to see more like it, like the rest of my tier list, again, we do have a board breaker tier list coming up in just the next few days. Then perhaps consider subscribing because we're on our way to 5,000 subscribers by the end of 2023. Not to mention, it supports the channel more than anything else, and it's absolutely free. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.